So the first thing we're going to talk about is Windows operating system. So nothing has really changed with 4.3 in regards to the Windows OS from 4.2, but I just want to reiterate a couple of points on here because there has been some confusion since the last release. So currently, every system that ships from here deploys with Windows 10. Systems that are currently in the field that do not have Windows 10, so for example, every XE2 system that we've shipped with, which is basically our current Dell platform that we've been shipping with for 3 years, most of those systems have Windows 7 on them. So for this release, as well as the 4.2 release, those systems are still able to upgrade using Windows 7. No systems that leave here at this point are going to ship with Windows 7. They're going to be Windows 10. For customers that may want to upgrade their own PCs in the field, or customers that want to provide their own PCs with Windows 10, it's extremely important that they understand that they have to have an enterprise solution. So Windows Pro has kind of been the go-to solution for Windows for years. Since Windows 10, that's not an appropriate release or a version of Windows for us. There's a cyclic update that occurs within that version of Windows that removes control of when the system reboots, which, as you can imagine, can wreak a lot of havoc in a production environment. So for that reason, they really need to have an enterprise solution. Incidentally, our XE2 PC that we have been using for the last 3 years, that's slated to go end of life at the end of 2018. So probably in Q2, you guys will be hearing from us in regards to that. We're getting ready. We're really just going to go to the next evolution of that platform. It's been a really stable platform, and they're going to XE3 from XE2. So you guys should be hearing from us on that probably in Q2. Any questions on Windows support? So again, just to summarize, nothing's changed there for 4.3. I just wanted to reiterate the fact that we currently can only ship with Windows 10 and the fact that we still support Windows 7. Okay, there is a firmware update that needs to take place for this version of PathMaster. The plan was to not have to update the firmware, but we found a bug in in the free YARC command when we were doing final testing, which forced the firmware update. So just be aware of that. So in addition to that, obviously, just as with 4.2, the DMC 4000 series controller is required for this version of PathMaster, just like in 4.2, in order to use all the new features. There is still a legacy mode that supports the old controllers, just as with 4.2. Okay, there is a small portal upgrade as well. It has to do with the interface module, the PathMaster interface module. Nothing much to note there as far as you guys are concerned. It's just wanted to make you aware that there is a portal component that needs to be updated to take advantage of 3D profiling. The PM interface, for anybody that's not aware, that's simply the handshaking module that allows PathMaster and Portal to talk. When is there going to be what? At what level? Hardware modification as far as controller? Okay, so like how far back yeah, there's Frank was just asking about at what point, moving from one version of PathMaster to another, what are the different hardware requirements? So just thinking back, I mean, 4.0 to 4.1 is where we introduced vision and skew correction. 4.2 was the needle cal, so obviously there's a hardware requirement there. Only if they're using the needle cal. So again, all of these versions are backward compatible, and they support a legacy mode. So anybody that's upgrading with older hardware can still use these new releases in legacy mode without the new features. Correct. Yep. And that was to Frank's point. Since 4.2, we've started making that distinction where the features that we've been adding and been getting a little more complicated. So we sort of made a cutoff at 4.2 where new features that were being added were not supported by the old hardware, meaning primarily the controller, the DMC 4000 controller, and then any ancillary devices related to specific features. Needle cow, for example, height sensing equipment for 3D profiling, which we're going to talk about. Okay, main program changes. Obviously, there's a main program change for this as well, just like pretty much every PathMaster release. Again, the main program changes are required only if you need to use 4.3 in its newest form, meaning that the legacy mode will still function without the main program update. Devices supported for 3D profiling. So currently we have the mid-coil touch probe and micro epsilon laser for the height sensing. So that's the device that looks down to and measures the substrate height. And then currently there is a mid-coil base profile device, and that's the plunger that the run tools touch off. So currently, for example, if they have a needle cow and they want to do 3D profiling, they will need to install the mid-coil in addition to the needle cow. Eric Duma is currently working on a revision to our needle cow that will allow us to use the needle cow as that plunger for the base profiling. So any questions about upgrades, hardware, software before we start to get into the PathMaster changes? Okay. You guys are pretty quiet. Hope everybody's still there, I assume.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So now we're going to touch on the changes to 4.3. So obviously the big change to 4.3 is the introduction of the 3D profiling. That 3D profiling is currently selected in the polyline command. Supported devices, obviously the laser and the touch probe. The easy profile device setup. So if you guys remember back to 4.2, we kind of changed the way we set up and configured the needle cow from what we had previously. The task prior to that was pretty significant, whereas with the 4.2 release, it was a matter of lining up the camera with the crosshair on the needle cow, which basically tells the system where that device is in space, and then running a setup sequence. So we followed suit with that with the profile setup. So it's the same kind of mentality where you line the camera up over the plunger, and then you run a setup sequence. And from a software standpoint, that's really the only thing new as far as setting up that device. So we tried to keep it very, very straightforward and very consistent as far as from 4.3 or 4.2 to 4.3. We've introduced a surface height command, which is used to basically take a surface reading, and then those surface readings are referenced within the polyline command. We'll get into that a little bit in a minute. For 4.3, we introduced a new polyline interface. So we took the existing 2D and 3D polyline, which I think everybody will agree was a little clunky, and we pretty much removed that and replaced it with a single polyline function, which encompasses the 3D polyline. I'm sorry, the 3D profiling functionality, and it's sort of an all-in-one 3D polyline, 2D polyline. So we'll also take a look at that. We've introduced a move speed command. So for independent moves in prior releases, you would have to set a global move speed. And these are independent moves, which means non-dispense moves. So other than setting the global speed, you could have introduced some DMC code, which is a little bit foreign to most customers. So as a result, we've introduced a move speed command to kind of fill that gap. The tool command, so those would be pneumatic functions: tool up, tool down, tool rotate. Previously, you could create and insert a tool, but you could not edit the tool function. So that was a pretty widespread request, and it was pretty straightforward to do. So we took care of that. We've added a run sequence command. So previously we had a run fiducial command and we had a run selection command. With the introduction of the profiling, we needed a run surface command. Because everything needs to kind of run in a sequence now. So fiducials would need to run before surface commands, just because the surface commands would need to be run in correct space, which would be followed by whatever path segment is selected. So to kind of give people a quick way to do all that, we added a run sequence command, which would first run fiducials, then run surfaces, and then run the selection. We've also added some color indicators to our fiducial command, our surface command, and our run selection command, just to give the user some feedback as to the state of the system, as to whether or not it's in correct space or not. And then the typical, critical bug fixes obviously were a part of this release as well. Any questions on any of that? We'll get into some examples here in a minute. You guys are super quiet. Everybody got their coffee? All right. So you guys should all see a sort of a split screen now, hopefully with the machine either on top or on the side. You should be able to switch between those views. If you go to if you got the top and bottom view, you can go to the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and you'll see a set of expansion arrows there. That'll give you the side-by-side view.
Yep.
All right, so I guess I'm going to touch on setup briefly here. I don't know how much interest you guys have in that, but feel free to ask questions or ask for more detail. Really what I want to point out here is, if you remember the NeedleCal setup here, you guys see my cursor? Yeah, okay. So we basically did the same thing with the profile. So you go into machine parameters, you got a profile calibration configuration. You click on that button, you move the head over to the plunger. So you line your crosshair up with that plunger. You teach that. You hit Control S to run the setup sequence, and that's really it as far as configuring the software. So just like the 4.2 release with the NeedleCal, I think we've made some pretty significant improvements there. So hopefully everybody likes it. You'll also notice that if you go into one of these run tools, there's now an additional checkbox basically to indicate whether or not that tool is going to use profiling. So that those two things combined are kind of how the system determines whether a tool is going to be used and sets the appropriate offsets. So you can see in this case, I have a laser and a touch probe, which are both height sensing devices. And as far as configuration of those, there is now a device type of type profile. And when you select that tool type, it's going to ask you whether it's a contact or non-contact. And that's pretty much all there is to the setup. So I got a quick demo here I'll run for you guys. So this is basically 5 lines that are doing a multiple surface checks to basically take a reading on this dome-shaped part here. So we're taking 15 surface readings there with a laser, and then we're following that with a line. And then we have an array of 5 repetitions of that. Okay, so now I'll throw a different shaped part in here. We should be able to run the same program on this other part here. Video's lagging a little bit. It's making the head look a little weird. Okay. Okay, so if we take a look at a sample program here, for any of you guys that are used to PathMaster, you'll see that we've added this new surface command. Start a new program here. So if we click on this new surface command, basically it's going to ask me to, in this case, I'm going to line up my laser with a spot on the part. And I can teach that position. I can specify a min or max reading if I choose to. Now I can create, obviously, multiple surface commands. So now I have 2 surfaces in the grid there. And if I click on my new polyline here, you'll notice that the old 2D and 3D icons are gone, and there's a single icon. So this is the new polyline interface. So at this point, I have a couple of choices. I can either proceed to teach my pattern and then reference those points to a surface with this dropdown. You'll note that the 2 surfaces that I taught are in this dropdown box here. So I can either program my pattern, say with the camera, for example, and then assign a surface to each one of those points. So it's copper's pretty reflective, but I'm going to select line, teach. I can select another line. I forgot to reference my surface on that last point, but when I teach the second one, I'll select surface 2. Go out of teach mode. So on the first point, since I forgot to reference the surface, I can just highlight that and come back and reference the surface. And that basically connects that line to those 2 surfaces. The other method that I can use is, so we'll start a new line here. Since I know I have surfaces to reference, I can click on this surface coordinates down here. So rather than moving my head to the position, if my line points are going to be identical to my surface checkpoints, I can check the surface coordinates here, and it'll bring in both of my surfaces with coordinates, and I can simply teach the line based on those coordinates. And then the other thing I haven't done here, each point in the line segment has a coordinate, a speed, a surface reference, and a relative height. So in this case, I neglected to put a valid relative height from the substrate in there, so I can go back and do that. I can highlight the program. I'll put 2 millimeters in there. I'm currently in counts. As far as surfaces, what's slightly different than before is, before we obviously didn't have this drop-down box, but when we think of surfaces, we commonly think of the custom surfaces that we're referencing. But we also have gantry raw, gantry relative, and then calibrated Z. So gantry raw is what most people are used to. That's basically your raw encoder counts. Gantry relative is sort of a new mode where you can teach the segment with the tip of the needle on the substrate or just off the substrate, and then provide a relative height from that. And then calibrated Z is the equivalent of the old calibrated Z that references the tool table. Okay, the new move speed, nothing too exciting there. It's pretty straightforward. Just open the command, you select the axes that you want to modify the speed for, type in the speed, click done. And you can open that up and tweak it as needed. You can see up here, let me get to a valid program here. So the new buttons up here. So this is the old FID. We got a new run for surfaces. So if I select this will run all the surfaces that are in this program. Right now it's yellow, indicating that I have surfaces in the program, but they have not been run yet. Once I run those surfaces, that'll go green. Similar concept to the FID button, where that used to turn green after you were in corrected space. Now it'll stay gray if you don't have fiducials in the program. If you have a fiducial in the program, but it hasn't been run yet, it'll be yellow. And then once you run them, it'll turn green. And then to the right of that, we have the run selection. And then to the right of that, we have the run sequence. The run sequence does nothing more than run FIDs first, if FIDs are in the program. Then it'll run surfaces, and then it'll run the selection. So it's just, this run sequence is nothing more than a combination of these three buttons. Sort of a quick method. So that's the nuts and bolts of it. Unless anybody has questions, I didn't have too much more. I don't know if Frank has anything to add.
I think just to note that this will be essentially installed on all machines going to production right now. Essentially in order to.
I can't hear him if he's talking.
Are you muted still? Hold on a second. We got a technical difficulty.
No, I would just say, and obviously this is officially released. This will be installed on any equipment that's currently heading into production. So any new orders will have this functionality. If you need to take advantage of the profiling features, then obviously we need to make sure that you have a measuring device on the head, either the touch probe or laser, as well as needle positioning, so needle calibration. Could you do the needle cal or the plunger, or do you have to do both? What was the answer on that? Just one?
Currently, you would need to do both.
Okay.
When Eric gets his revision done, we're expecting to be able to use just the needle cal.
So right now, you would need both until that's updated. So the needle cal, the plunger, and the laser to take advantage of the 3D profiling. So again, if you're looking for customers to retrofit, that would be the only hardware modifications if they don't have that, but no other software modifications. Well, I'm sorry, hardware modifications required of the software.
So the plunger on the needle cal at this point doesn't, you need more than that. You need the actual, the Japanese plunger, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So the history behind that, Chris, is we initially started out with the idea of using that plunger on the needle cal for everything. The original design of that needle cal was not intended to be accurate on the retract. the initial data that we took with that block indicated that it was going to be okay. But what we realized over time is as that plunger rotates, that return position becomes less accurate. So as a result of that, we switched gears, and the initial deployment is going to be with the Mitutoyo, and Eric is actively working on a revision to the needle cal to correct that.
Okay.
At that point, we will eliminate the Mitutoyo as the base plunger.
So we see the 3D profiling obviously a lot, or the need, I guess, more in gasketing and stuff. I was thinking on a call with with Lockheed, who's getting ready to come in on their machine, that from a coating standpoint, I think one thing they were excited about is they have a lot of warpage in their board, but maybe it doesn't work. How would that work for coating and for particularly maybe long connectors? So if you're using, I guess what I'm asking, if you're using a needle, the 3D profiling is probably a good way to go. But as far as warpage and spray height and containing that same height across the board with some pretty major warpage, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, from the coating perspective, currently the surface reference is only the surface command is currently only referenced in the polyline. So with coating, you do a lot of areas typically. So I guess the short answer to that is if you're able to use the polyline function to teach your coding path, then yeah, the 3D profiling would absolutely compensate for that, assuming that you have the ability to take a good surface reading.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions? Want to see anything else?
Okay, yeah, again, some technical background behind it that Tom provided, but again, I think the keys are just to realize or understand that it is available now on all future orders, what the hardware requirements are for your quoting purposes. I don't know, did you want to get into PathView at all with this? I mean, we're essentially done with that.
Yeah, we haven't set an official release date or date. In the next few weeks, we should have that nailed down.
Right. So, for all intents and purposes, this will again be our step to eliminating PathView from our portfolio. So anything that would traditionally required that should be looked at with this software upgrade here. So, any other questions on that, guys?
That looks really good. Looks good.
Nope, all good.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Any questions, guys? I just want to make sure you're all good on the new configurator release as well. Any questions on that?